Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Wow, you're all awake. I'm surprised. Good morning to those who are online. So today we continue our studies here at TSS with the lecture that's going to talk about sex and sexuality according to Spiritism. It's going to be done by our friend Tiago. But before, as we always do, Rafa is going to do the initial reading and the prayer for us.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So, the initial reading will be from Happy Life. Get used to the truth. The habit of the white lie, also called an innocent or social lie, will lead you to more serious lies and push you into the swamp of colony and frequent coursing. A spark produces conflagration similar to those products by creeping flames. Great crimes originally in tiny infractions beyond the reach and justice allows for the evil to worse. Be morally severe with yourself. Do not embrace in the canoe of convenience. Everyone is responsible for himself and his acts and engraved on his individual conscience. Be yourself in constant moral progress. So let's close our eyes, elevate our thoughts for the Master Jesus. Let's clean our mind, put our problems outside. Just let's focus in this lecture with Tiago will share with us, and let's spread the love and the harmony taught by God. So be it.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good to hear that, to wake me up. I like that last phrase, which I forgot already, half of it, but the number one is about being yourself. The second one is to act based on your moral evolution or your moral growth. And I think it has a lot to do with the lecture today. Just a disclaimer. The amount of material that I found about sex and sexuality according to Spiritism would be enough to have the entire year of 2018 of an entire seminar. Every single Sunday we'll be talking about it, and we would not get close to half of the material that I found. And that is an incredibly surprising thing because there is so much taboo about sexuality. There is so much misunderstanding about sexuality. At the same time, there is so much being talked about it. This is the most incredible thing for me. And I was very, very happy to know that there is an open, genuine, serious opportunity for us as Christians and as Spiritists to talk about sex and sexuality in an open, in a non-judgmental, in a very straightforward way. That was my disclaimer, because the next one is not a disclaimer, it's just a reality. We may talk, and I don't want to explore anything explicit, I don't want to explore anything graphic that is nothing to do with that. And in showing the perspective that the Spiritism is teaching us about sex and sexuality, the intention is to place that theme that is so vital for us in the category that it deserves. It's one of the most important aspects of each one of our lives. It is easy to realize the importance of sex and sexuality because through that act that we will understand when has also the spiritual aspect attached to it, through sex, we have, number one, the entrance door for our continual evolution. If we take in perspective that first statement, that through that thing we can enlighten ourselves and make a lot of sense on why and how we are here right now. Based on that, everything else that we discuss and everything else that we talk becomes progressively more natural, with less difficulty to understand, to make sense. And we can understand a little bit as well, based on the idea of the reincarnation, why there is still in life so much taboo about sexuality. I will not get even close to the surface about that topic, but I will really suggest that for whoever has interest, go on the internet. Very important names on the Spiritism talk about it with a lot of enthusiasm, with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of seriousness. And there is beautiful literature that talks a lot about sex and sexuality in Spiritism. Of course, based on the advancements of the social sciences, of the medical science, of the psychological science, because the Spiritism doesn't have the pretension to eliminate the need to study, to eliminate the need to progress with society, but encourages us to make sure that we don't forget one thing. Together with the material aspect of those sciences, looking at sex from the biological point of view, looking at sexuality from the societal and from the social point of view, doesn't exclude bringing the Spiritism that will bring what? The spiritual aspect of sexuality. So then we really can look at it in such a more profound way that gives us a beautiful picture of the importance that it has for us. Okay, let's go forward then, after that introduction. I would say that the first mention that I saw in the Bible itself about sexuality is in the very beginning of the Old Testament, when God created. The act of creation, in essence, is the most elevated level, the most sublime level of what we know today as sexual energy. The harmony of the entire universe persists, and planets don't collide with each other, and galaxies are formed and progress and evolve through billions and billions and billions of years, as an act that I can say that is the most sublime act of love. That was the love that came from God itself, that represents the most spiritualized level of the sexual energy. Sex and sexuality have to do with creative energy. Without that creative force, we would not exist. Science will not progress, and we would still be very close to our brothers and sisters primates in that chain of evolution, because we would not have even the drive, the desire to create. Now, if we start thinking about certain definitions here, the first definition that we can try to grasp, first of all, if we go to the dictionary, right? What is sex, after all? And I think many of us would have an idea, Many of us would have some opinions or impressions about it. And in looking for different definitions, I found some of them that are very interesting. Number one, either of two major forms of individuals that occur in many species and that are distinguished respectively as female and as male, especially on the basis of their reproductive organs and structures. Okay, if we just stop here and then we start from the very biological definitions. Many organisms or many individuals, and here we are speaking not only about humans, right? But we are speaking about many life forms. That is a leap of evolution from the unicell organisms to the multicell organisms that by reproduction multiply from those organisms that would multiply themselves by themselves as a non-sexual multiplication. We have another leap of evolution in our species, which is the differentiation between one male and one female organisms. Now, imagine how long ago that happened. Probably billions of years ago, millions of years ago. In the evolution of all the life forms on this earth, we understand, of course, that all this evolution, instead of random, was all directed by what the Spirits say, the divine architects, that under the command of Jesus Christ himself were given the task to generate, to create for us the forms that we have today and the bodies that we have today, so then as spirits we could incarnate to progress. This didn't happen overnight. That creation that we're talking about, the symbology of the 6 days or of the 7 days, we know that this is being happening for billions and billions and billions of years. So since the beginning of our own planet, since the beginning of life on this earth, we see the expression of the sexual energies being put in motion. And from the very first organisms, the most simple ones, to today, with approximately 7 to 8 billion humans, excluding every other life form. Today, many of the life forms that exist on Earth depend on sex to exist, to reproduce, to multiply, and to evolve. Taking away that somehow awkward impression that many of us will grow up having about sex and sexuality, we bring that to such light and such fundamental aspect of the evolution of our entire planet and why we are here, that we understand that the reproductive structures are here to help us to evolve. Also, thinking about exclusively about us, about humans, about beings with reason, with intelligence, with a moral principle, we see that is the sum of the structural, functional, and behavioral characteristics of organisms that are involved in reproduction, marked by the union of the gametes, and that distinguish males and females. Of course, that here we are still potentially speaking about any animals, any forms that we know today, with more elevated levels of life. But when we start thinking about behaviors, when we start bringing sex to a level that involves our conduct, we also give another leap. When we start slowly detaching sex only for the means of reproduction. Because, and I will explain a little bit more afterwards, why in many ways we grew up, and some of our ancestors grew up with that idea that sex has one function, which is reproduction. And that's why we have so much guilt sometimes and so much difficulty to make sense of it in such an open way. And the third aspect is sex. It's a sexually motivated phenomena or behavior. So that could be only understood by the material sciences. And that already gives us a lot to think about. But let's try to bring a little more light based on the Spiritism to understand a little more the function of sex in the entire process of spiritual evolution. Of course, the first thing that we need to understand and that we must make sense of is, do we believe in spirits? I hope that the people who are here at least are in conflict between believing and not believing, which is great already. We don't need you to be sure of it, but at least if you are in conflict, that is a great, great step forward. If you don't believe everything else that we're going to talk about, you may not care, or you may not believe. But because if we have a little bit of conflict, that is awesome, because we become interested. By the way, to be interested in something, I must tell you, this is sexual as well, okay? In essence. Don't blush. It is, I will explain why you don't need to blush. Let's go to the source, right? Let's go to the Spirit's book. Allan Kardec, a great educator, a great, brilliant mind that had the mission to, after communicating with the spirits, compile a body of understanding about who we are, where we come from, what's our destiny, what that entails, has an entire chapter, or more than one chapter, speaking about sex, about what sex is for us as humans, for spirits, the consequences of the sexual energy being put in practice in our relationships. And then he asks the spirits very directly, do spirits have sex? And the spirits will say, not as you understand sex. For sex, in that sense, probably the spirits also knew in which way Allan Kardec was asking. In that sense, depends on the corporeal organisms. In that way, Allan Kardec possibly was asking, like, do they have, one, sexual organs like we have? Two, do they interact sexually with each other or not? And it's a very interesting answer. Not as you understand. Love and sympathy exist among them, but founded on similarity of sentiment. And I think here we start understanding that for the spirit, sex in itself has no quality. Sex in itself is almost a mechanical action. Sex as part of our physical constitution is just there. may be used, may not be used, may be used in different ways. However, as very bright the spirits who were engaged in answering Allan Kardec knew that those answers would give food for thought for us. So then the number one aspect here that we can raise in terms of reflection is why, when Allan Kardec asked about sex, the spirits mention love, sympathy, affinity, similarity of sentiment. Maybe that starts giving us a different understanding why we, in growing up, especially for those who grow up based on certain religions and faiths, that we hear things like, sex only with love, sex only with people that get together with certain purpose. So the spirits are trying to give the essence of all that we have today as social norms and expectations around sex. So then they're talking about love. They're talking about sympathy. Therefore, if we understand that sex is a life force, we understand that that force or that energy is something that helps us to connect with each other. Therefore, the sex is a means of connection. Not sex as an act, but sex as a way or an energy that helps to connect people. If we think like that, and we will get to the definition afterwards, I could start thinking like, well, in the way that the spirits are telling Allan Kardec about sex, I can transcend sex from the sexual act. I can transcend sex a little bit from the use of our bodies with each other. Sex has a different dimension. Also, Allan Kardec will ask, because remember in the first definition, that is the distinction when we think about sex on masculine and feminine characters. And I think now, for me, that really gives us way more reflection about our own constitutions of being a male or a female. Think like a man, think like a woman, have both masculine and feminine tendencies in each one of us, based on that answer that Allan Kardec asks. Can a spirit who has animated a body of a man animate a body of a woman in a new existence, and vice versa? Okay, we may believe in spirits, and then others would say, well, if I believe in spirit, I understand that the spirit itself will not have the same physical constitution as we see here, because based on the previous answer, the spirits will say, the sex that you understand has a need for an organism, for a body to exist. However, there is men and women, male and female, masculine and feminine energies. Therefore, the spirit is able to occupy a body of a man and also can occupy a body of a woman. The same spirits will animate both bodies. That is also really interesting, because we start also to understand that this entire societal expectations of roles of men and women can be discussed and reflected through that light. When we say that men are made for something, women are made for something else. Men have certain qualities, women have certain other qualities. Then we can understand that all those qualities have a reason to exist. They have a reason to be. And if a spirit occupies both a body of a man and a body of a woman, what does that mean? That means that we are to have all those qualities. We are to have all those characteristics. And we are able to develop both masculine and feminine characters in us, because both of them are essential for our evolution. Without one or without the other, we're not complete. Makes sense today talk about the equality of rights, because the spirit has the right and the responsibility to occupy both places. It has been said already, the spirit would say that we are supposed to know everything. The perfection that is allowed for us to have means that we will need to develop both qualities based on masculine and feminine energies in some point of our existences. Why would that happen? We're going to know more soon. And again, this Allan Kardec continues inquiring the spirits, and he asks, does a spirit, when existing in the spirit world, prefer to be incarnated as a man or as a woman? And that is another very, very good question. That would probably bring a lot more reflection for certain of the experiences that many of us may have today while incarnated. And the spirits would answer, that is a point in regard to which a spirit is indifferent, and which is always decided in view of the trials which he has to undergo in their new corporeal life. Now, we all live in a world that has values, that has morals, that is constantly changing, that is very dynamic. Not long ago, some of our parents or some of our grandparents had an idea of what a man and a woman would be. What was right, what was wrong, what was positive, what was negative. Science didn't allow back in that time for a man that felt intimately that they were a woman make a transition physiologically from one to another. Today, this is all here. And this is new, right? Less than, say, 40, 30 years ago. From that time, with more or less clear expectations, with people that didn't fit in one or another model, we'll have certain kinds of experiences while incarnated. But remember, they are spirits, temporarily incarnated as a man or as a woman. Now, we can start asking ourselves, why does a man incarnate, or does a spirit incarnate as a man and struggles and doesn't feel like that body belongs to them? That is an interesting question. We could say, and not long ago, it is a disease. It is a pathology. Not long ago, there was punishment for that. In some parts of the world, sadly, there is still punishment for that. Today we understand that because of the interest of the spirit, which programs its own incarnation with the help of their mentors, their guides, their spiritual group that will help them to make that path where there will be lots of educational experiences during those years that we are here incarnated, may ask for that experience. Why? Number one, it will depend on the conscience of each one of us. But usually more struggle means more need for self-education. We know that unfortunately we are still not in the level of having those experiences by means of regeneration. Sometimes we are still having those experiences a means of a trial, a means of an expiation. Therefore, we may understand that many of us may have had difficult experiences in the area of sexuality, that we may have still not understood the importance of what sex and sexuality has to our lives and has to our relationships. Therefore, coming back to earth, experiencing the other sex, maybe to value those experiences that probably in some point didn't value, maybe in need to grow spiritually, developing some characteristics that traditionally are from one sex or the other. Certain spirits that came several incarnations as a man feel the need, feel the interest, or understand that for their evolution it is important to experience some of those characteristics that traditionally a woman has, including certain different relationship that they have with their own emotions. How a man and a woman today are recognized or not in the society that we live today. How much acceptance or not we have living the way that we live today. Those are all spiritual experiences in essence. We may face, some would say that is a lot being talked about, the need for a better respect, for a less differentiation in terms of value, men or women, value more, value less, sexual identification that is accepted, that is not accepted. We are having a golden opportunity in this age in our existences that we are able to start reflecting on how fluid masculine and feminine is for our lives. Those are two different radical aspects of a spectrum that is almost infinite for us. If the spirit needs to incarnate in both of those extremes of experiences, necessarily we are to experience that spectrum in order to grow. So let's just try quickly to summarize a little bit from all of that. There is a few points of reflection that we can take. Number one, sex is a divine energy. It is not a coincidence that Noah, when builds the ark under the command of the superior spirits, put the pairs of the animals there, because they should reproduce and multiply and occupy the earth. Starting there, there is a fundamental aspect. We need it. We need that differentiation to grow. We need that differentiation to multiply. We need that differentiation to balance those different kinds of energy, because we need them both in order to grow as spirits, as organisms, as beings. We develop our sexual components through our species evolution. That is a very, very complex book from André Luiz that is called Evolutioning to Worlds. That book shows us that many of the behaviors and components of our spiritual life that we have today is being built, is being developed and it's been evolving for approximately 1.5 billion years. The superior spirits would not waste time developing sexual components in our spirits and in our bodies if this didn't have a function for us. We understand that in our spirits, if we go back to the works of André Luiz, we understand that we have what many would understand as chakras that are vital centers of energy that are part of our spiritual body or our perispirit that condense and that distribute some of those energies throughout our spiritual and corporeal body in order to help us to continue growing and to balance the dynamics that we have, because our spiritual body, imagine if our material body is already complex, imagine our spiritual body. And God would not allow that one of those centers of energy be the one exactly where our sexual organs are, which is called the seventh vital center, the genesic center. That is the one that grounds us to the forces of that earth. If it was not important, we would not have an entire vital center that keeps us grounded to this earth, which is the one that regulates our sexual energies, that regulates all our sexual hormones. We would not have a distinction between every cell that we have in our body and the sexual cells that have a very different function. It is those cells that instead of multiply one just like the other, it is the one that's divided in two and are directed to our sexual organs to connect with other cells from other bodies through their own sexual organs to create life. Biological life, not spiritual life. Nonetheless, life. Sex is the entrance door for life as we know here to exist. Therefore, it is divine. Sex is also defined by the spirit's needs. Being born as a man, being born as a woman, being born as a man after 3,000 years of being born as a woman. What do we think is going to happen? We're going to bring those tendencies with us in the body of someone of the other sex. Therefore, having the opportunity and the challenges to experience something different. Isn't that marvelous? Isn't that so enriching for us? If this doesn't help us to break a little bit of some of the taboos, prejudice sometimes, which we all have. I don't know what would... Each incarnation will present different opportunities for us, for growth, including in the sexual area of our lives. And, as the spirits teach us, love and sympathy are the foundations of the spiritual sexual experience, based on affinity of sentiments. This would be more or less what I found in terms of definition of what is sex, simply. Now, if we think about the definitions on sexuality, now even more we give another step. Sex still has that biological component, has to do with our organism constitution, has a lot to do with the distinction that we have as physical bodies. And one important definition that comes from a psychoanalytical dictionary. And here we also continue using the science that all of us help to develop, understanding more and more the social, the psychological, the profound meaning that sexuality has in our lives. And those authors that are called Laplanche and Pontalis, they are two psychoanalysts. They are from the old Sigmund Freud school, who was one of the pioneers of recognizing that we are sexual beings in a society in the 19th century that, or the 18th century, that had so much taboos in terms of sexuality, understanding that children didn't have sexuality at all, and understanding that those roles of men and women were so defined that there was a lot of taboo in terms of talking about sex, sexuality, desire. They say that sexuality does not describe the activities and pleasure that depend on the functioning of the genital apparatus. So they are already breaking the connection between the sexual function and sexual the effects that what the sexual experience has on us. It is breaking that with only the genital apparatus. How come? How can I have a sexual experience without my sexual apparatus? How can I have sexual experience without having genitals? That sound, back in the time around 1900, that sounded a scandal. Even today, sometimes it is difficult to understand. However, they say it has to do with a whole series of excitations and activities present since infancy. Okay, therefore, we understand that since infancy, we do have sexual experiences. How come that? They will explain in such an interesting way. In the evolution of our psychosexual development, it is understood that the first experiences that bring pleasure to us are sexual in nature. When the baby looks and drives itself towards the breast for the milk, and the sensation to have the warmth of a mother's body around them, and the warmth to receive the milk that they are having to nurture their bodies, to be satiated when that milk comes to their stomach, and they feel that they don't have that need anymore. And many of us have seen already, after having been breastfed, besides the burping and everything, what do? They rest, they sleep, they become calm, they stop crying. Therefore, it is pleasurable. Does it have to do with the genital pleasures that we understand as adults today? No. But it is the very principle during our development that we need to have as a prototype of other forms of sexual satisfaction. Will start through different areas in our bodies. Therefore, the very founding experiences that we have since we are born, they will help us to develop that sense to feel happiness, to feel pleasure, to feel satisfaction. Therefore, also in recognizing others having the ability to give happiness, to do something good for others as well, and not only receiving. In this process of development, we understand that not only we are learning how to receive something positive, but we are also learning how to give, therefore how to exchange. And that's why, as adults, we have that process of educating ourselves to exchange that sexual energy, not only through our sexual organs, but also through the ability to generate relationship, to dream together, to have wishes together, to do something that make others feel happy. In many cases, to envision giving life. Remember that giving life, it is not only generating lives through our own bodies. Otherwise, it would be also something negative having two people that have the same sex being together. Does that exclude them from having the ability to exchange sexual energy that has to do with love, sympathy, sentiment, and happiness? No. Does that eliminate the possibility to generate or to make life grow and develop through education? Through helping not necessarily those who are born through their biological means, but also to welcome to their lives those who will need, that don't have somebody to teach them how to grow, how to be raised, how to have moral values. Those are all subliming aspects of our sexual energy. So, in thinking about sex and sexuality, from the point of view of Spiritism, I will only bring a couple of passages from the book from the Spirit Emmanuel called Life and Sex, Vida e Sexo. Again, the literature is vast. I would have only references here if I were to bring them to you. But I brought a couple only to help us to understand the function and the level of how the sexuality is important for us in terms of spiritual evolution. And the first phrase is not prohibition, but education. Spiritism doesn't prohibit anything. Spiritism doesn't tell you not to have sex. Spiritism doesn't tell you which sexual orientation is healthy or unhealthy, but tells us in the matters of sexuality, as if in any other matters that has to do with the life of the spirit, we need to educate ourselves. Therefore, we take away healthy and unhealthy, pathological and non-pathological from sexuality, and we bring to the realm of education. Education of sentiment, education of relationships, education of values. Through sexuality, we can give others happiness and we can hurt. Through the irresponsible use of sexuality, we create expectations in the other. And if we are only using our sexuality in a selfish way, we will necessarily hurt. Oh, sorry. Not imposed abstinence, but honorable use with respect to others and oneself. The Spirit Emmanuel will talk about one word that is called chastity. For many of us, chastity means abstinence. It means no sex. In the same way that even back in the gospel, when Jesus talks about the purity or the chastity, he was talking about the chastity of related with purity of sentiment. The chastity with the absence of malice. He's relating to responsibility, to the responsible and honorable use of our sexual energies, with respect to others and with ourselves. If we look at sexuality only from the biological point of view, we will be very close to any other species that one look for sex for reproduction, for pleasure, and then discarding many times their sexual partners because the only reason why they use their sexual energies in that moment, it was to procreate and multiply as a species. We have a responsibility to transcend. We carried this with us as bodies, as organisms, as species that are growing throughout the millennia. However, we are given the free will that entails responsibility. We are giving discipline. We are given the ability to educate our feelings, educate our tendencies, therefore separating ourselves from only being instinctual beings, but to be moral beings. And moral has to do with our conduct, our understanding of what is good and what is not, of what is healthy, what is not, of what brings life and what doesn't bring life. Not free impulse, but responsibility. And he will continue. Through sexuality, poor creative forces to which we owe on earth the reincarnation. Without the use of our sexual energies, we would not allow reincarnation to happen. And remember, reincarnation is one of the pillars of Spiritism that shows that there is no justice without reincarnation. There is no evolution without reincarnation. There is no possibility to mend our own mistakes and to grow from them and to perfect ourselves and to come back to redo or to do different or to do better things that we did in the past with each other and with ourselves, that we understand in the spirit life that we could have done better. Because God doesn't punish. God gives us opportunity to educate ourselves and to love ourselves. Home. The institution of a home today, it is a series of relationships that we carry throughout the centuries, changing the roles that we occupy in each other's lives, with a chance that we have to make more sophisticated connections, to grow from instinct to sentiment, to bring back together beings that hurt each other, misusing their sexual energies only for instinct, for selfish purposes, to be more altruistic. The blessings of a family as the nucleus that will help us to develop the ability to love, and to love in spirit. Not to have that false notion of love that is based on connections that only exist through the body. There, in the Spirit's book, when Allan Kardec speaks with the spirits, they would say there are two main kinds of connections that we make in our families. One is based on the connections with the body. The other one is based on the connection that we have with the spirit. The ones that are only based on the body, when the body ages, the love disappears. Actually, because it was never there. When the body doesn't give the other or to themselves what they were looking for, which is only the satisfaction of immediate pleasures, there is nothing left. But when that connection is made through the level of the sentiment and through the level of the spirit, there is an opportunity for that family to grow and evolve in sentiment that will turn the primary instinct that we had before in the love. Actually, through the same connections in different configurations of the family, because the same partners that linked each other only through the ties of the body will have the opportunity tomorrow to link themselves through the relationship of the spirit. We have the re-energizing joy of affection. That is the pleasure that is way beyond bodily pleasures that in some point disappear. But the affection, never. Because the affection belongs to the spirit. And the treasures of spiritual stimulation. The sexual forces is what stimulates and drives us to go forward, to grow, to learn. Those are the forces that will stimulate us to intellectualize ourselves as well. We know from great names in the Spiritism, Francisco Cândido Xavier, Divaldo Franco, that give testimonies of their own sexual experiences. Yes, not as we know, but the stories that they tell show us that as spiritualized beings, more than us at least, they are able to, in the way that Divaldo Franco describes, speak with his own sexual cells, with his own sexual elements that belong to his own body. And that energy can be transcended. And he says that when he was able to educate his sexual tendencies and his sexual forces for a more spiritualized action, that's when his mediumship or his connection between the spiritual and the corporeal world became much more whole, became much more intense, and he was able then to produce much more of what we know that is so much benefit for us through the connection with the spiritual world, through his writings, through the writings of many other spirits, through his own mediumship. And he says that the mediumship on the missionaries of mediumship like himself, like Francisco Cândido Xavier, exist because they are able to transcend in such a level their own sexual forces that they can use those energies in benefit for entire humanity. There we have the importance of our sexual force, and all of us are able to do that. Of course, it's going to take a couple of incarnations, 2 or 10 or 100, it doesn't matter, but we will get there. And we're almost there. Last reflections that we have are: sexuality is an expression of our emotions. Everything starts with the spirit, and the result is for the spirit, using the body as an instrument, as a mechanism of expression and exchange of feelings and sentiments. And we learn that through our many incarnations. The source of our sexual energy is in our spirituality. When we speak about the unconscious, when we speak about our tendencies that we bring, that we don't even remember. For instance, when we have certain feminine tendencies, even though being a man, when we have traditionally masculine tendencies, even though being a woman, when we have that feeling that we have somehow components of both within us, it's because it is about our spiritual memory. Having experiences as a man and as a woman, learning how to be one, learning how to be another. Because at the end of the day, it is two sides and two aspects of our same spirit that need to be developed, like two wings. There is no exclusive masculine or feminine. And in living our lives today, more and more we see that assertion is true, because there is a lot of questioning today. Our souls, our spirits here are allowing each other to make those questions. And of course, in reflecting and making those questions, we will see the basis of the society, the way that we brought today to be the way that they are changing as well. Some of us will think that the things are worse than before. In fact, no. Every time that we try to change the status, that we try to change certain important conceptions in our society, first of all, we need to give room for that to happen. And we are doing that. In being out there, showing who we are, as men being acting in a different way, as women acting in a different way. Not to compensate each other, but to complete and to grow together, to multiply those experiences and to pass more positive experiences. Fighting the taboos that we are growing with for so long. Our sexual tendencies and behaviors, like all behaviors, are subordinated to the law of cause and effect. That's one of the important reasons that Spiritism gives to us. If we have struggles in our sexuality, is because it is a result or a consequence of our own imperfections or lack of previous knowledge that we have the opportunity to face today in order to grow. We are not talking about punishment, and if unfortunately today there is still discrimination, prejudice, misunderstanding, it is because we are being given the opportunity by God to learn from those experiences and making sure that we are the agents of change through the reincarnations that we have, in order to make those experiences be each day more fulfilling, more satisfactory, more enlightening for us, with less perspective on the body, with more perspective on the spirit. Our current relationships are a product of our past experiences, mainly of a sexual nature. There are lots of examples in the literature of partners that misused their sexual energies and misused their sexuality in the past, that are born in the same family, occupying different roles. For instance, there is one example of a man that had different sexual partners and were involved in irresponsible and only in an instinctual level related with themselves sexually, making others suffer, because this man was married, create a lot of suffering for his own wife, and instead of being punished, he received those two sisters as two daughters, therefore having an opportunity to transcend that love and that attraction that they had through the instinct level, through the material level, and having the opportunity to transcend that to the level of the sentiment, to the level of love. Having jealousy when they leave home, having that jealousy when they found a partner, and learning how to have that selfless love that all of us are to have. Making sure that our love doesn't imprison anybody, but make them grow. It is not our sexual identification or orientation that defines our morals. They are defined by our own tendencies as spirits. Less spiritualized we are, more trouble we will have. More spiritualized we are, better connections we will make with each other. It doesn't have anything to do with our sexual orientation. The role of pleasure in our lives is also a product of the species that will create attraction between beings. But today we are also having the opportunity to transcend that bodily pleasure, to make sure that we are going to slowly start experiencing a different level of bliss and satisfaction for life, through helping somebody, through making a family, through dedicate ourselves to someone that is in need, through being able to find pleasure in helping, to find pleasure in learning. That is the transcending aspect of pleasure in our lives. And we know that we carry taboos from other incarnations. Many centuries we carried the taboos related with mainstream religions that unfortunately put in the dark the sexual aspect of relationships, because of the tendencies that they had to dominate, because of the need for accumulation of material possessions, and to try to control the minds and the spirits of people, basically controlling their sexual energy. We still fight that, because not long ago we were incarnated in times that or we were punished by expressing ourselves sexually, or we punished others for that as well. And we have the responsibility to educate and to spiritualize our sexuality and not eliminate it. Forced celibacy doesn't work. There will be the time, if we have the opportunity to, and if you feel the call for that, wonderful. That is part of your time as a spirit to have that experience. In forcing yourself and your struggle, you understand that instead of eliminating with the fear not to use well, go and educate yourself. And love, ultimately, is the element that gives the harmony not only to sex, but to all relationships that we have, and ultimately that gives the harmony to the entire universe that was created by God as an act of infinite love. And of course, that always I like to remember Jesus when he tells us to love one another like he loved us. And he loved us with the purity of those energies, of those tendencies, because as perfect as he was able to use his love to make the world be what it is today. A home that we spoke about, a family that we spoke about, that are growing together. And Jesus continues loving us and asks us to love through our sexual energy, through our affections, through our sympathy, mending the mistakes that we made in the past, learning how to love, to one day experience fully the love that he taught us how to live. Thank you very much. So much time.
That's okay. Thank you, Chi. So I thought myself it was really eye-opening. I never thought about sex and sexuality in a different way that you have explained. For me, sex was sex, the physical act only. So it was really interesting for me. We can have a couple more minutes if anyone have any questions or any comments. No? All right. Online? No, nothing? Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Chi. We'll get ready for the passes. And thank you for those who joined us online. Hope to see you next Sunday, or Wednesday, or Thursday, or Saturday. Any day.
We always hope. Yeah. No.